Hello, hi, and welcome everyone. This is me, Prem Kumar. Today we have Adam with us. He's quite a bit of a pro in immigration. Welcome, Adam, on my channel.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for listening, everybody. I'm an immigration consultant. I'm registered with the Immigration Advice Authority. I'm currently based in Somerset in the UK, and I do a lot online, so you may see my activity on LinkedIn. I primarily work with the points-based system, so things like the student, graduate, work, and business-based routes. And that's me. Thank you for having me.
All right, no, thank you so much. And I think in this video, I really wanted to capture the essence of skilled worker visa. We know the process is not too complicated. There are tons of videos out there to really talk about how do you apply step by step. But there are complicated things that happen in future that may make you fail your application for ILR after 5 years. So just wondering, do you have any thoughts on how do you make sure that you don't fail that going forward and you keep your record clean for that?
Yeah, so there's a few things to consider when you're on the path to ILR. So the first one would be continuous residence. So that's to do with your residence in the UK and also your status in the UK. So making sure that you're submitting an application to extend your visa on time before your current visa expires so you don't accidentally become an overstayer. There's also a residency requirement. So you must not be outside of the UK for more than 180 days in any 12-month period. So there's a bit of confusion around this because sometimes people think that the clock resets from January to December and you have kind of an allowance within that 12-month period. But the reality is that in the rules it states any 12-month period. So what that means is that if the caseworker were to get a large calendar on the wall and it had 5 years of your history on it with all the dates, and then they got a measuring stick that happened to be 12 months wide,
Yeah.
they must need to be able to put that measuring stick at any point on that 5 year calendar and it not be exceeding 180 days.
Wow.
So that's another really important one. Now, of
I
course,
did Excel, to be honest, kept everything and tracking each date, what happens in past 12 months if I start
yeah,
here.
yeah, it's really important, especially if you are traveling fairly regularly. You
Yeah.
just want to make sure, and of course, you do need to have an accurate record for when you submit your ILR
Yeah.
application. Other areas to look out for is obviously be sure not to get involved with criminality because that can have a detrimental effect on your visa status in the UK or your ILR. So those are the main particular ones. There is one more in the context of the skilled worker that many people can sometimes get caught out on, is that the way that the skilled worker rules essentially work, the assumption is that your job code and skill and responsibility level will either remain the same throughout your career path in the UK,
Mhm.
or you will go higher in terms of responsibility and skill.
Mhm.
So if you were to go down in responsibility and skill, that could lead to an application being rejected because they could look at that and see your current level of skill and responsibility, and they could interpret that as a way of you just trying to do a similar job but be paid less.
Mhm.
So that's something really important to keep an eye out for. Obviously, there are circumstances that happen that are outside of people's control, and sometimes maybe a slightly lower skilled or slightly different career uh, presents itself in terms of sponsorship.
But
In
with the
that
same job
case,
code, right? Because otherwise you'll have to restart that 5 years again.
so interestingly, any job in any job code can count towards your
Mm.
5 year total. So it won't reset your 5 year
Okay.
clock if you change a job code or if you change, if you go up in skill or responsibility
Okay.
within your field.
No, that's better to know. About the COVID times, I know literally if you think of people applying now, everybody would have faced those years whereby either people were stuck outside for months or couldn't go, and people might have exceeded the time of I think it's for 50 days in 5 years. Sorry, 180 days each year, and then for passport like for 50 days in 5 years. So how do we justify that to Home Office if something like that happened to someone?
There are some circumstances where absences are not counted
Hmm.
for the purposes of the rules. So a very big one that will everybody will know about is COVID.
Yeah.
So if you had a period of time, for example, where you were restricted in travel and you physically could not come back to the UK because of COVID, those days can be disregarded according to the rules. Other reasons could be, for example, if there's a natural disaster
Mm.
which affects your travel, if there's compelling or compassionate reasons. So, for example, there might be the death of a loved one back home. Other examples can also be so we've gone through COVID, compelling and compassionate reasons, things like instability in the region, anything that's preventing travel. Um, if that was the case, then obviously then it would need to be well explained in an application to show the specific reason. So, for example, it could be a government announcement where the government says, "Okay, we're stopping flights between
Mm.
these," or it could be a flight ticket that you bought that got cancelled because they've stopped the flights.
Mm.
Or of course, if it's to do with a loved one, then it may be to do with, maybe a death certificate or some sort of evidence that they're in hospital or
Yeah.
something like that.
Okay. I guess wise to say then you need a cover letter. If there's something unusual, you need to write to Home Office what happened really along with supports. I guess that goes same for most of the visa, like partner visa, where you have to explain the proof of relationships and things like that in written format to make it clear for them. That's helpful to know. I was just wondering on the maintenance requirement as well. I know some employers do certify that, and you don't have any problem with that. Like, if you're even doing your first visa or the second visa, which is renewal, and then ILR, but some employers don't. And if somebody's not certifying, then how do I keep track? What is your thought on that?
So the maintenance requirement mainly comes into play, like you said, if it's the employer does not tick that box to certify maintenance. It also comes into the fore if you've not spent at least the last 12 months in the UK at the point of applying. So the main point where it really applies is where, for example, a dependent partner is applying to come in from outside the UK,
Mhm.
where you would need to show maintenance. But of course, for any extension moving forward, as long as they've been living in the UK for at least 12 months prior to um, the date of their extension in terms of their visa, then they won't have to show maintenance. The only exception to that would be is if someone happened to be outside the UK for at least 3 months within the 12 months prior
Mhm.
to the dependent visa being extended. And in that particular case, that would break your 12-month
Um,
residency, so then you would need to show maintenance in a future application. But as long as you mitigate that, as long as you monitor that, generally speaking, for the majority of scenarios, it's mainly for the first application to come inside to the UK.
Most of the employers do certify, like especially A premium or A. And I guess people, employers below that may not be able to just because of their capabilities at this stage. Last question on skilled worker, and then we'll move on the dependent side of it. So skilled workers definitely all type of visas need to be honest and truthful with Home Office. But sometimes people think the Home Office might not find a record of the criminality either in UK or outside, and they just try to don't talk about it. Uh, I think it's risky. Of course, you shouldn't do it. But what are your thoughts on it?
My policy would always be to disclose, so share the information, and then explain. So it's far better for you to disclose the information and explain it, and then for the Home Office to deal with it accordingly within their own frameworks, than for you to not include it and then them to find out. So one of the main reasons why that is so serious is because you could be accused of something called deception. So it would be deception by withholding information. So, for example, maybe you don't meet that criteria, or this could look negative for you, so you don't include it. The problem is with that is that you could be accused of deception by withholding that information and them discovering it. And that could lead to a potential 10-year ban on entering the UK. So I would advise strongly against doing that. My advice would generally be disclose and explain. And then, of course, you're not going to be accused of deception.
Mhm.
And then the Home Office are going to assess your circumstances in terms of the rules. And the main section where you would go to learn more about the reasons why applications will be refused,
Mhm.
it's something called Part 9 of the immigration rules. Part 9, reasons for refusal.
Is it widely available on internet?
Yeah, so it's publicly available.
Okay.
So if, for example, you were to Google immigration rules part 9,
Mhm.
that would take you to that particular document, and you can look through all the different circumstances. There's a section on criminality. There's a section on debt to the NHS. There's a number of sections, so it's worth reading through if you're in doubt.
Thank you for that. I think in my case, when I joined UK, my employer also did a DBS clearance as well as a security check, apart from what Home Office does. So I think if you are joining decent employer, you'll have double checks anyway. So don't hide anything. They will know eventually. It's an easy visa, I guess. Skilled worker is not a difficult visa. It's much easier than other type of visas to get your ILR. You don't need to provide too many supports eventually, but something may blow up, and you need to be careful of all those things. Um, anything which is kind of latest from Home Office or government that might impact skilled workers or maybe the ILR, like anything that's happening in the market.
So we're expecting what's called a white paper to be coming out at some point. I've heard it's going to be coming out in the spring.
Hmm.
So that's the cover. The current government is going to be essentially coming out with a plan for how they're going to be dealing with immigration and the various routes and the measures that they're going to take in order to achieve those goals moving forward. So at the moment, we don't have a lot of information, but we should expect to get that through in spring this year.
I hope it's not 10 years ILR as conservative had said, 10 years ILR and 15 years passport.
Yeah, obviously, understandably, that caused a lot of concern. I mean, the important thing to note there is, of course, they're the leader of the opposition. Um, we're just going to have to see how things play out. But of course, they're not in government right now,
Yeah.
so any of their particular policies have a limited impact in terms of what's happening now and the short to medium term.
Thank you so much for all these insights on skilled workers. I know it's easy process, but complications can arise, and it's horrible. You spend 5 years of your time, and then eventually somebody tells you you can't get your ILR. That means you probably wasted 5 years in a country. So it's always good to make sure you follow your immigration guidance properly. Thank you so much for that. Definitely insightful, and anybody watching, Adam is of course an expert in the visa side. So if you need help, you could reach out to him on LinkedIn. I'll put the LinkedIn ID in the description of the video as well, so it's much easier to reach out. And definitely free guidance is always around on LinkedIn. Adam posts literally every day. You can see a lot of posts, and I find them useful as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for
All
having
right.
me.
Thank you.